The Visual Studio team, we used to have an idea about, when I joined Visual Studio, we had an idea that we were not like our customers. People would sometimes say, like, our customers are not like us. We have all these unique problems. We have to design software differently than our customers. And I think one of the things that we've learned over the last 10 years is we are a lot like our customers. We have many of the same common challenges. So I'm sure many of these challenges are things that you see. When you have big teams, or you have many different teams doing different parts of a project, how do you have a whole view of the project? How do you make sure the product all comes together? How can you manage kind of the progress of the project in one whole thing? How do you think about customer value? We ship a lot of functionality to a lot of different customers, and many of those customers have their own way that we interact with them. How do you manage that flow of output out of the team so that it's kind of a consistent flow? And as we move more towards these from 3 and 5 year ship cycles to more kind of service-based continuous delivery or subscriptions, people want more regular flow of value. How do you do that? Faster cadence, shipping things faster. Quality enablement. The idea that you build in quality into the product from day one, so that at the end of the day, you ship a better quality product. Collaboration and productivity. As our teams get bigger, we have to ship software faster. We have to have our people still work well together and be happy building software. As Microsoft, we have to, one of the things that attracts people is, are people excited to come to work and do work on the project? And that means they expect to have a good experience using our own engineering system and building products with it. Just as you expect to have a good experience using Visual Studio to build software. And scale and complexity. We have, I think you saw some of those numbers, but we ship a large number of products, from Visual Studio to the online services, to tools for the different platforms. We have about 2,000 people in developer division, but then we work with a lot of other engineers. And you can see on this map, we're actually just DevDiv. Our Visual Studio team is actually all over the globe. We have our biggest team is obviously in Seattle. We have people in India, in Shanghai, in Zurich, in England, in North Carolina. There's some other ones that we didn't even, I think this one is Minnesota. And all of those people have to kind of work together. And we have to have the processes and systems to help them collaborate, even though they're all over the world. So how many of these problems kind of are problems that you face too?
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
So you have many teams around the world,
yes.
right? So do you assign different tasks to different teams, or you simply, regardless of the region, you simply dispatch all the features or tasks?
We have, so the way we usually do things, for most of our teams, we have feature teams that are separated by regions. Often what you find in some organizations is they will have their dev team in one place and their test team in another place, right? We have a practice of having our whole engineering team, dev, test, and PM, kind of be together. And in fact, one of the things that we've done in the last year, I work in a building where we've actually we've designed the building to enable this kind of collaboration. So we don't have offices, we have these feature team rooms. So all of the people who work on a set of features, set of related features, sit in a room together. And sometimes it's not easy for people to sit together, and that's why in our product we now have the idea of virtual team rooms in Visual Studio 2013 to help people kind of collaborate. But we try to have feature teams kind of sit together. And then so our India team, for example, is almost 200 people. They do all of our kind of our delivery tools. So they work on our testing tools, our release management product, our tools for dev tests and so on. And then North Carolina, the team there is the team that owns TFS and many of our collaboration features and our Visual Studio Online service. So we split it up usually by features.
So you won't do one feature in two different regions?
We will sometimes have feature areas that split up. Visual Studio has scenarios that span the whole product. Like if you think about cloud development, right? Cloud development touches almost every part of our team, and then some partner teams. And so we have end-to-end scenarios that involve many feature teams. And so we've had to do some things. We will have, for example, we will have meetings that are in a certain part of the day that allow teams from India to call in. I used to be at one time we had a staff meeting where Julia used to actually be in China at the time. And we used to have our meeting at 7 a.m. on Monday mornings because that was the only time that we could get India, North Carolina, Shanghai, and Redmond to all be in the room.
I have same bad experience. Yeah, I have a condo at the 11 p.m. to 2 a.m.
But teams have actually, if you give them tools, they will actually come up with interesting ideas. We have a team in Zurich, and their program management and test team is actually in Seattle. And so one of the things they do is they do a virtual scrum. So the team in Zurich will do a scrum, and they record their scrum with link. And then they put the link recording and the notes online, and then when the team in Redmond wakes up, they look at that, they do their own scrum, and then they kind of pass information back and forth. Right? And because you can collect all that information in TFS, it allows them to collaborate together.
Sorry, but I remember that Trend will also adopt link, right? Link, YMC. So we use the link
old
for.
version of Communicator.
Okay, yeah. That would be the older version.
Yeah, one of the nice things, and you'll kind of see, we're starting to actually integrate link and email and presence into our tools. So in CodeLens, for example, you can directly start a conversation. If you see, you're looking at a piece of code and you see that somebody's been working on a piece of code, you can directly start a conversation with them on link right out of Visual Studio. And then we've also done tools and things like Outlook to allow people to create work items out of Outlook. So that if you're having an email conversation, you can actually connect that back to TFS. So we think that people have these different ways of working, and they have different groups, and we want to kind of enable them.
You mentioned about the tools and how you arrange the process.
Yeah.
One follow-up question is about the culture.
Yeah.
Because different people have different cultures.
Yes.
For example, when you're working with the EMEA team on the Zurich, I think they have a different culture than the US team and the Asia team. So how do you tackle those?
Even our US team actually has it's actually something that we really value, the fact that our team comes from all these different cultures and they bring their own kind of ways of working. It is an interesting challenge, but I think some of the ways that kind of our processes kind of help people at least speak a little bit of the same language, right, from an engineering perspective. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but just as an example, even in our product team, like we have teams that ship with Windows, we have teams that ship with Visual Studio, we have teams that ship box products, teams that ship services. They all ship in different frequencies and different speeds. They have different kinds of teams, sometimes have different methodologies. We tried to figure out what are the things that we should make the same, right? So one of the things we made the same is we have a single way of thinking about the calendar. We use 3-week sprints, right? Now, not everyone does exactly the same things on the 3-week sprints, but by everyone talking about, so instead of talking about days and weeks, we now talk in sprint numbers. We say, what's everyone doing for sprint 58? Right? And it's like we started this calendar, I think we're now up to 59. And we're just going to keep, so many years from now we'll be in sprint 280 or something. But we use that as a common way for teams to be able to show their schedules and things like that. And if we want to line up a release for a certain sprint, then everyone knows they have to kind of use the sprint planning to ship. So those are examples of things that we've done to kind of have enough common. But then within that, we want to encourage teams to kind of, make the best of the culture that they have. And it's actually very nice because, for example, the India team, they work on test tools, so they're able to work with all of the, turns out in India there are a lot of teams that do outsourced testing in IT. And so the test tools team can work with them to go look at, to provide solutions for those teams. So having that kind of, that mix really helps us. So this data is a little bit old. It's about it's more than a year old. I was trying to get data today, and my wireless cut out, so I couldn't get the latest data. But this kind of gives you a sense of the scale, right, of Visual Studio development. So in addition to people who are kind of working on the product in DevDiv, we have a lot of partner teams that actually deliver into the product. We have many product versions and SKUs. So in 1 month, that month we did 21,000 builds of our products. These are kind of some of the TFS stats around work items and source code. So we have really benefited, I think, in using the product ourselves and really trying to drive scale. And now that we're doing Visual Studio as online as a service, we have to kind of have that kind of scale of the product to kind of drive it. So let's look back a little bit. So this is the part that gets kind of scary. I joined DevDiv in 2002, just as we were shipping the first, kind of end of 2001, just as we were shipping the first Visual Studio. My first major release was Visual Studio 2005, and it was supposed to be less than 3 years, and I think we ended up shipping. We were more than 6 months late. And in fact, we had the ship party. We had this ship party to celebrate shipping. We had our ship party before we shipped. We had to delay our ship. And it was in many ways it was a good example of how not to ship software. Right? So we had 3 milestones. Many teams didn't actually do anything in the first milestone. We had all these different teams inside the division. They all kind of had their own way of working. They all thought they were the best way of working. And they all had their own view of how to kind of develop the software. Sometimes teams wouldn't integrate their code for a whole milestone because they wanted to just be left alone. And so we ended up, by the time we got to N3, we were so far off from shipping, we ended up having to break N3 into 3 milestones. So at 3 milestones became 5 milestones. We shipped the data, and we ended up, that was really the first time all of the pieces of the product were put together. And then when we shipped between beta 1 and beta 2, we had to change a lot of the product because that was the first time customers actually got to try it. So we had a lot of DCRs, a lot of the product changed. Test had been testing the previous version of the product before we started this product. And so they spent all this 3 to 4 years trying to catch up. And so beta 2 was their time to really try to catch up. So they worked extra hard to try and kind of come down with all of the debt. And then we ended up having several RCs before we were actually ready for the product. This is what a bug curve looked like for 2005. So you can see from January 2004 to, like, this is early 2004, you can see like we were making no progress. And then at some point, we had some reviews and we kind of made people try to fix bugs. And then this was kind of this trajectory down towards shipping in the beta. So this is just the beta timeline. But you can kind of see, like, until people got into ship mode, they were kind of up here. And so how did they actually make that happen? Well, it turns out that we entered the product with tens of thousands of bugs from the previous version of the product. And those bugs, as teams would kind of drive their bug count down to 0, they would just defer more bugs. And so it turns out we actually exited the product with about the same number of bugs. And it's kind of, when you're trying to ship fast, if you have all these bugs, it's like carrying a big sack on your back. You're having to do triage, you're constantly looking at bugs that may or may not be valid anymore. And it makes it very hard to execute. How many of you have had challenges with lots of bugs? Kind of having to be in bug dev. Seem familiar? A little bit? Maybe not at this scale. But yes.
Let me make some comments in Chinese. 大家看到那个纵轴可能会觉得哇，2万多个 bug。我可以跟你讲我们的定义的 bug， 比如说，因为我是产品经理，常常要去 review localization、translation。那我们只要觉得这个语义这样翻不太对，我就会去 fire 一个 bug。所以大家那个 bug 不一定是 functionality 的，包含像那种 UI translation， 我们通通就会去 fire 它。所以为什么会那么多？那比如说我最近就像 Spring， 他刚刚一直在讲 Spring 嘛，对不对？我们在 Scrum， 那个 Spring， 他们那时候 team 就问我说，Spring， 请问台湾需要把它翻成中文吗？他就帮我翻冲刺。那我会想想，假如把它翻冲刺，大家听得懂吗？干脆就不要翻。所以我就翻一个 bug， 他们就 remain in English。Yeah, I just joking that we have the terminology Spring in Scrum, right?
Yes.
Spring in Chinese is the running.
Yes.
Yeah. But we just remain in English.
Yes.
So everybody here in Taiwan, they know Spring, but they don't know running. Yeah. Also, we fire that a bug.
Yes.
This defects from all the versions, including the localized versions.
These are all kind of all product bugs.
So there's a central database for all the.
We have a central database for all our bugs. So all the bugs in the product, today they're in TFS. So when you saw the work items, in fact, one of the principles that we have in kind of Agile and that we've kind of carried forward for Agile is all work is work. Right? So bugs are work. We used to have developers, very smart developers. They would suddenly stop doing features for a while. You're like, what are they doing? Well, they're actually going and making the engineering system better. Right? They decided that they'd write some check-in suites or some other tool, and all of a sudden they go dark, and you don't get anything out of them. And so one of the things that we've said is get all your work into TFS. It's all work items. If you think you have to improve the engineering system, make that a work item. Get in the product. If you have bugs, if you have feature requests, all of that work goes into TFS. And that way, when you look at the overall project status, you can see all of that work as a whole. And so this is something I definitely encourage. This is something every team can do. Right? Like all of the kinds of work that you have, you can actually go and put that into the product. We used to have actually around this time in 2005, we did a time on task study where we asked everyone to kind of write down exactly how much they spent their time. It was getting a little crazy. They were putting down like bathroom breaks, things like that on there. So not everything in TFS, but at least all of the work of the project.
One question: will there be items that when you complete the priority, it will become the lowest priority, even they're there for a long time? Will there be those items?
Yes. So
How do you deal with
one of the things, and so I'll just talk about what we did with bugs. The reason why we have so many bugs is people would find a lot of bugs. Not just customers, but we had testers who would spend a lot of time trying to find bugs in the product. And it didn't those necessarily weren't the most important bugs to fix. But then we had a lot of important bugs in the product too. And when you have 30,000 bugs, it's very hard to know which ones to fix. Right? And so what we did was we created, after 2005, we decided we would fix this whole problem. So one of the things that we did was we had this thing that we called MQ, it was a quality milestone. And what we did was, during the quality milestone, we wanted to drive all of the bug out of the product. And we spent a lot of time going through all of those bugs and deciding which ones we really needed to fix. But then we put a principle in place. So engineering principles was very important. We put a principle in place that you don't defer bugs. If a bug is important enough to fix in this release, you fix it. If it's not, you don't just defer it to the next release, right? Because you're just creating debt. Right? So, of course, near the end of the project, you will defer some bugs, but that's not because those bugs aren't important enough to fix. But it's because the change you're making might be too risky to ship in the current version of the product. Right? So you defer bugs based on the risk of shipping, not because if it's not important enough to fix now, don't fix it. Don't carry it and so that's an important distinction we made. We closed a lot of those 30,000 bugs without fixing them. But overall, the customer perception of the quality of our product went up because we spent more time focusing on the right things. And so that's something that was important to do. Yeah.
What do you mean by this? Is the product
So, for example, let's say in the last week before a project ships, you find a bug that requires a fix that is very core to some algorithm in the product. You might not have time in that 1 week to figure out if the change you made is going to cause any regressions or not. Right?
So it combines with the product quality and scale.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, the risk on the shipping stage is really, you don't want to find bugs too late in the cycle because then it might be too late to verify whether your fix is going to work, right? And so a big principle of Agile is also kind of driving to quality early, driving quality upstream, and I'll talk about that. But if you don't drive quality upstream, you're going to find more issues right near the end of the product, and then it might be too late to fix. But you're still, no matter what you do, you will still find bugs about the day before shipping, right? And you might choose not to fix those that day, but you don't defer them just because they're not important. So that's a key thing that we did. But then getting clean also means you stay clean. So one of the things that we did was we created this concept called bug jail. So anytime a developer has more than a certain number of bugs, they stop working on features, start working on bugs. And so the idea is you find bugs at a steady rate by finding quality issues early, and you use concepts like bug jail to kind of drive more of the quality early. And I'll show you what the bug curve looked like for 2008 as a result. We introduced this concept called feature crews. So before, dev and test were separate. Dev wrote a bunch of code, threw it over a wall, and then tested it. Instead, what we did was we said every feature crew has all of the disciplines. They sit together. They build their schedule. They're responsible for the quality of what they ship. And so dev and test have to come up with one date by which they're feature complete, not code complete. So we don't use the term code complete. Because code complete implies that we're not at quality. So we started using the term feature complete. And that was by which feature can be done at a certain level of quality. And that was a big part of kind of defining done. We had a lot of challenges in 2005 with all these different product teams. So we started to actually put more teams together. Now there's only one, really two teams, but we have one kind of top level leadership with product areas underneath. Previously, at one point, we had these product units. I used to run a product unit. There were at one time about 35 product units in Digital Studio. So it's 35 different views of the product. We've consolidated that. But one of the things that we've done is we put the whole team together through something that we call scenario-focused engineering. So the idea was having one view of the product. So starting from the product definition, we had the idea, and you'll see this in the book that we have, some of the structure that we have of having pillars of the product, value propositions, and then scenarios. And so the idea is, you have this kind of hierarchical view of the whole product as one. and then you use that to kind of drive the right priorities at the top level. And this is still tricky because for a big organization, it's very hard to do all together. And I'll talk about one of the challenges we have is how do you do it when you're shipping all the time, right? But this is something that we kind of put in and we train people to kind of think that way. Some other kind of engineering principles I talked about bug jail. We also started investing a lot in kind of this, engineering tools for measuring and hardening the product. So previously, we didn't have a lot of tools for kind of measuring regressions or understanding things like performance. And we actually, as part of NQ, we had teams go and think about what tools they needed to build to help them be able to understand the aspect of their product from day one. And then from a division perspective, we started to do a lot more oversight of the quality of the product as an end-to-end thing. And so as a result, like all of these things that we put in were to kind of get rid of what we thought was the overall debt in the system. So you can see the effect of that. This is the comparison of Visual Studio 2008 versus Visual Studio 2005 in terms of what the quality curve kind of looks like. You can see a lot more of a stable curve, and a lot more of a manageable way of developing the product.
So how long did it take for you to drop down those?
Our NQ was a few months. It was about 3 months, I think. We still 2005 to 2008 was still a 3-year cycle for a product, so it was a fairly major cycle. But you can see we actually had a significant amount of debt reduction, like 15 times less. We didn't defer a lot of stuff. There was a lot more predictability. We shipped faster, and the result was there was a lot of improvement in customer satisfaction in 2005.
How to measure debt reduction?
Debt reduction, in this case, I'm just talking about bugs. Now, you can actually, one of the things, if you do include all work as work in the product, then you can start to get it, the more you can kind of include, the more you can get a better sense. But even then, it's very hard to do, because we have, when you're shipping a product like Visual Studio, we have all sorts of things that can count as debt, right? To us, debt is things that we could be doing now that we're waiting until the future to be doing. So, as an example, we have architectural debt, right? So, how many of you have times where a developer takes like you go through, you design a great architecture, and then at the last moment a developer takes a shortcut, right? Because they have to fix a bug. And now you've built architectural debt. The team in Zurich actually has a really nice way. Every 3 weeks, they spend 1 week kind of coming clean on their debt. And so as part of what they do is devs go back and look at the work they did over the last few weeks and say, did I do something that I should have really done better? Right? And then they have that week to fix it. And if you're doing that often, then you never really get too much debt buildup, right? Because you can't really mess things up very much in 2 or 3 weeks. So you can always fix the problem. And so part of the agile model is to have this rapid cadence to allow you to kind of manage debt better.
Yeah, it's very in Chinese.
Yeah.
就刚提到，因为债务很多嘛，所以他们就给这个 team 其中就有1周就专门来解决这些债务，所以他讲到说 architecture design 这个平常根本没时间做，然后我可能在一个 sprint 里面，其中1周我们就专心来解决这个 architect， 可能做 refactoring 这一些事情，所以你们也可以回顾你们的 team 是不是可能去这样做，去做这样的安排。对，所以我为什么会特别提出这个问题？这个原因。OK。
How often do you do the
So we did that quality milestone once. Our goal was to get caught up so that we wouldn't have to do it again. So the idea was you get done, and now you have to stay, right? Because if you think about it, can you afford to take 3 months off to just catch up on quality debt? Yeah.
Yeah. In the NQ phase, who make the decision to fix the bug or not to fix the bug?
So that depends on the importance of the bug, but it's something that the feature team does together. So our devs kind of know the implementation. They know about the amount, the work required to fix the bug. They know the risk to the product and code base in the design. The testers know kind of, are there issues around that? What's the impact of that to customers? And then PMs kind of know, what is the overall impact of fixing that bug or not fixing that bug from a customer perspective. So they kind of work together to do that. We generally have leads or managers doing the triage. So now, having removed all that debt, between 2008 and 2010, we could focus a lot more on the flow of value. And 2010 for us was really the first time we started using a lot more of kind of agile techniques. And I've got a couple of slides here, but these are just the kinds of things that we did as we started to kind of build more agile techniques. Teams were starting to use some Scrum at this time. Some teams were kind of trying things out, but most of the division was still using kind of waterfall techniques. But we did start to use a lot more of kind of this understanding the flow of value and looking at once you kind of get to that green model, where you stay in green. Right? And so this is a couple of examples of slides. You can see, this is something where we're kind of tracking overall burn down of tasks. How are we kind of progressing? Are we actually implementing the user stories that have been designed? Are you seeing what kind of issues we're seeing in bug trends? I mentioned managing the bug trend. Once you get to a point where you have no debt, you can kind of look at the flow that's coming in and the flow coming out, and you can make decisions. So if you have more bugs that are coming in than your devs can fix, your testers are finding more bugs than your devs are fixing, you have to do something about it, right? Okay? Because the debt's going to build up. It might mean you have too many testers in the project. Maybe they're finding bugs that would be. In fact, we find people, if you put too many testers on a project, they will find a lot of we call them Pi 3 bugs, right? They will find small nitpicky things about different features, small bugs that really don't need to be fixed. But at the same time, if you have real bugs that are coming in and you don't have enough devs to fix it, and devs are spending time on features, then you're building up debt, and that's where we have things like our bug jail to help. On the testing side, this is the kind of tracking we used to do, looking at the flow of tests. So, are we making progress on implementing our test plans? Are bugs being fixed quickly enough? The fixes actually fix the bugs. So we spend a lot of time looking at regression rates and things like that on our bugs to see if those bug fixes are fixing bugs or generating new bugs. And we use those things to kind of track parts of the product that might be more risky. So the result of that, we actually, again, we were able to have a pretty successful release with 2010. And kind of to point out what I was describing, even though we kind of spent a lot of time driving because we spent a lot of time kind of driving that debt down, we were able to actually create a more targeted product with a lot of value in 2010. So now we're going to kind of talk about what's happened since then. And I think the big thing to kind of realize here, between 2005, 2008, 2010, we're still shipping software on kind of a 3-year cycle. Right? 2008 actually, because of the timing, it was 2008 to 2010 was 2.5 years. Since then, we shipped 2012 in 2 years. We had lots of new features in it. We had to support Windows 8, which is a completely new platform to target. So almost half our division was working on tools for Windows 8, but we still shipped in 2 years. And now Visual Studio 2013, we shipped in 1 year. The online services. So we now, when we started that, we would ship updates to the online service every couple of months. Now we ship every 3 weeks. Product updates. So Visual Studio 2010 had 1 service pack. It came about 1 year after we shipped. Visual Studio 2012 has had 4 product updates, including new features for people with Ultimate. And so we're now shipping lots more software on a lot more rapid cadence, kind of almost like a service, as in this kind of what we call this kind of service-like cadence of continuous value. And it's not just minor features. We have had to build support for new platforms like Windows and Windows Phone and Azure. We've had lots of new capabilities, especially in our ALM tools, and new big bets we've made. Like Visual Studio Online was our first move into services, and now as of recently, it's now gone to commercial availability. That's taken a long time, but it's been a very big bet in putting a services platform. At the same time, we have all this Visual Studio code base. We have code in Visual Studio that's probably 20 years old. Some of it's older, if you think about like the C++ compiler, for example. We have tests, we have engineering tools, everything from those days that are kind of carrying forward. And so that's been a challenge. How do you move all of this forward and still kind of bring all of that code base and all of that work forward?
Question?
Yes.
Yeah, friends always asking me why so often we ship the product, especially for the dev tool. So I think the backward capability
Yes.
should be super important.
Yes.
How can we maintain that?
So that's the thing, right?
我问他，因为我们ship产品很快，开发工具很快，那向下东西一定要做得非常好。比如说 Visual Studio 2013，它一定要能够打开2012的发权，2011的发权，所以这个就是我问他的问题。OK。
So as Microsoft, we don't get to, just because we're shipping faster, we don't just get to ship at lower quality or change things. There's we have enterprises that are actually deploying our software. So TFS is it's an enterprise server, right? So there are certain requirements around the level of quality, the level of compatibility. Even in our own tools, if we put a bug in the C++ code generator, Windows doesn't boot. Right? When Windows is compiled, Windows doesn't boot. And now you have to actually debug what went wrong in the kernel debugger. Right? That's not fun for somebody in Windows to get a Windows update and like an update of our compiler and have that kind of problem. So we have all of the kind of core requirements around compatibility, fundamentals of like performance and reliability we have to maintain while shipping on a faster cadence. And again, this is, I think we face this, but I think all of you do too. Right? When you're shipping software, you can't break your customers. So for us, that means we have to think about how do we do software development completely differently. Right? So all of the things that I talked about previously, most of it was focused on this. It was about how do you develop in the feature teams and kind of keep debt down. But we still had, we would still take 2 or 3 months to plan. Right? We would still have a beta and an alpha and maybe a beta 2 and an RC. We would still have test passes and stabilization milestones that we did here. We would still have service paths over here. And when you're shipping on that faster cadence, you can't have those things kind of come one after another. You can't take 2 months off to plan. Right? You can't take 2 months to go from beta to RC to RTF. You have to think a lot more about how to do all of these things at the same time, right? And how to make this kind of happen. And the more people that you have to do it, the more difficulty you have with developers and testers working together, or PMs and developers working together, or ops or developers working together, the harder it is to make this work. And so for us, being able to move to this way meant we had to rethink all of this. And I think I'm going to go through each of these, some of the things that we've done. But as we've done them, this is also what we see our customers doing, right? As they're shipping more software continuously. Developers working together with ops, with our what we're doing with our modern application lifecycle, and the idea with DevOps that developers have more power to be able to look at the view over here and make changes. The idea that you can take code and be able to release it frequently with high confidence. The idea that you can take all of the learning from here and use that to plan the next version of your product. Those things we think are very important for everyone who are shipping software today. And so we ourselves are learning, but as we learn, we're taking those capabilities and putting them into the product. So I'll talk about that. So some of the things that we're doing, and I'll go into more detail, having a more continuous way of doing planning. So we're not spending a lot of time just stopping the train to go plan. Driving quality upstream, I mentioned. How do you kind of have higher quality software that's more done from day one? Making fundamentals a feature, things like compatibility and performance. How do we treat them as features? We don't just treat them as things that you do at the end of the product. Shipping early and often. How do we get more people? And we as Visual Studio, you get to use our product as we're building it. How do we do that? And how do we get more feedback? And then in our services, how do we ship more often and get that feedback? And then learning, kind of living what we call the live site culture, right? So, in the old days, when we shipped software, after 3 years, that was the time for the dev team to take a break and go on vacation. Now, when you go live, that is the busiest time for people, right? So how do you kind of live that culture?
Especially for those online services.
Yes, yes. So we just went through Visual Studio Online. The team was very, very busy the first 2 weeks.
Very high pressure, right?
Yes, absolutely. So how do you make the team effective in that model? And then being usage and data driven. If you're doing this fast, you have to make more good decisions early, right? You can't make too many mistakes. So you have to have good data to be able to make faster decisions and the right decisions more quickly in this product process.
Will you switch roles between the production and development?
Do we switch roles?
Yes.
Well, so one of the things, I think, part of living the live site culture is the dev and the engineering team, really dev test, are also responsible here, right? So dev test and ops were together, right? So previously, in our feature crew model, dev and test sat here, other people sat here. Now dev, test, ops are part of one feature crew, right? And so devs and test have to sit in. We have these live site meetings. They're kind of like Scrum meetings, but you regularly look at how is the live site doing, and the dev and test team sit in there to see the state of the site. So as part of being the live site culture, dev, test, and operation has to be together.
Yeah, I believe dev and ops, they work together. That should be the big change to
Yes.
product, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we now launch the very online services like Office 365, our Azure platform, yeah, which is still online. Yeah. So operation is kind of product good.
Now, not all operations teams can be together with dev and test, and so many of the things that we're building for DevOps help ops work well together, collaborate better with the dev team to enable people to find and fix issues faster. So I'll talk about that in a second. So common plan and cadence. I mentioned, we have lots of things shipping in the division on many different cadences. We have some people still doing waterfall, some people doing very agile. Many of our products are very different. The C++ compiler is very different than the web portal. Right? And so we can't have one single methodology for all of the teams, but we try to have a single way of thinking of the whole product from a plan. So we do we call it an integrated plan. So the idea is you build one plan, and then you have the teams go execute on their part of the plan, right? And then we use things like our sprint cadence to basically have people synchronize, right? Like basically find when are we going to get back together to look at what the progress is. How often are we going to have end-to-end product builds that people can use? How often are we going to have product reviews? How often are we going to ship previews or CTPs to customers? We use the sprint boundaries to kind of map that out. And so it gets everyone kind of thinking of the product in one way, even though they're doing very different things. Right? And that's a very big challenge for, I think, teams that, organizations that have very different product teams. How many of you have teams that are doing many different kinds of software projects too? Or you're working with teams that are doing different parts of a big software project? Somebody?
Try Michael.
Yeah, my team is pretty much like the situation that you mentioned.
Yeah. And so we know we can't get them all on doing software exactly the same way, but we try to think of what are their interactions? What are they, we call them commitments. Like if one team commits another team, they will say by sprint 58, I will get you this, right? And then they can do what they want, right? As long as they set a contract with each other of by the end of this sprint, I will deliver you these dependencies at this level of quality. Right? So we use things like our sprints to help teams work with each other and then be able to still do work the way they need to inside their teams. So some of the things that I think in the product we put in to kind of help with that. I mentioned planning. In this long world, you can't spend months and months doing formal requirements management and things like that, right? So we've introduced a lot more in our product for things like very lightweight storyboarding with PowerPoint. So somebody with PowerPoint can sit down and kind of design the equivalent of a spec. And many of our teams have gone from doing full long specs. Like, when I was a PM, we used to do 30, 40 page specs for a feature. Now we just do storyboards, right? And a set of user stories and create a backlog out of it, and that's and so that's something that our customers want as well. And so we're putting in a bunch of functionality for kind of lightweight requirements management. And the nice thing about that is it lets anyone be a stakeholder, right? It doesn't have to be somebody who has a spec template or knows how to code. A lot of our teams are using kind of our product views. I mentioned getting all the work in one place really helps you kind of understand, because a feature team can kind of go look at what's their state for this current sprint, and that view is consistent no matter what teams are doing inside their team. So we can then have project level kind of reports to be able to kind of understand that. Within the teams, a lot of teams are kind of using our kind of lightweight Scrum tools now. We've actually given people, now that they have touch screens, we use touch screens a lot for this kind of stuff to be able to kind of easily manipulate work items. But we give teams a lot of flexibility in how they run their own Scrum. We don't try to prescribe one single way of doing it. But you want to look at the overall product view, right? You don't want to just see what's happening in one feature. And so, a lot of the functionality that we've done in Visual Studio 2013 about kind of looking at the whole product view at the product level backlog and be able to break it down into feature teams. These are things that we ourselves do. We look at the product when we do an overall review. We look at the product from the top level view of all of Visual Studio and then look at kind of product areas. And those are the kinds of features we're now building into Visual Studio 2013. So in 2013, there's this capability of looking at the whole product level view and kind of understanding the progress on the product overall. So driving quality upstream. You know, we're in the middle of, I think, a big transformation in the dev and test roles at Microsoft. You know, I think our first part of that transformation was getting dev and test to work better together, because we had dev teams write code and then give it to test teams, which would test code. And then we kind of put them together. The next thing that we're doing is we're saying, if we're going to drive quality upstream, and we're going to have the code be at a higher quality from day one, you've got to have developers do more of that work. Right? So this already starts with, how many of you do unit, how many of you or your teams do unit testing today? So, we also didn't have a lot of people doing unit tests. And you know what? It ends up causing a lot of problems, right? Not just in the quality of the code, but how many of you write tests today or have teams that are responsible for writing tests?
What do you mean writing tests?
Writing tests, like testing a product.
Writing the testing script to
Yeah.
the product?
Okay. So one of the challenges that we find is if devs don't spend time writing tests from day one, the code is not testable. Right? So all of a sudden you have to write like very fragile UI tests and things like that. Like we would have to write all this black box testing because the product itself wasn't testable. And so what we said was, we said devs need to be writing unit tests, and they need to be writing more functional tests themselves, right? And they need to design the product with the right testability so that they can actually write the tests. And so at the same time they write the features, we call them test contracts. Test contracts are basically, you know, when you build a feature, you build in a capability into the feature to allow you to test the feature. And that is a contract, so that you can't break that. Right? So as you evolve the feature, you have to keep that up to date. So if devs own their own tests, when they make changes that break the test contract, their own test fail, and then they have to go fix it. Right? And so by doing that, you have a set of tests that are more stable, and you spend less time, you know, rewriting tests as the feature changes. And so that we think is an important thing, by having devs kind of take more responsibility for the testability of their own code. And the way they do that is we have them write unit tests. We also then use things like gated check-ins. How many of you have gated check-ins? Probably not if you have unit tests.
Yeah,
Right.
I think most of the developers in Taiwan, especially for software company,
Yeah.
they do unit tests.
Yeah.
But you know, as I said yesterday, they are so shy.
Yes, yes. Well, I think
so they did not rise.
yeah. So I think with TFS, we're starting to build in more capabilities into the system for doing things like gated check-ins. So when you submit a check-in, you know, unless a certain set of tests pass, the check-in will be rejected. Right? And we're doing more of that in our team ourselves. So TFS has that capability. You can actually just mark a set of tests that run on every check-in, and if they don't pass, the developer will get a mail back, a notification back saying that their check-in didn't pass the gated tests, and give you a shelf set so that they can actually make the changes and check it back in. So we're actually doing more of those kinds of things in our team. Tests. We used to have devs write a bunch of tests that run in the dev environment, and testers write tests that run in a different environment. And so the problem with that is it's very hard to share tests, and sometimes you write two versions of the same test. And so one of the things that we're doing is really encouraging people to actually let me show this slide. So that's what I was kind of describing by having devs test more of their code as they're writing. It's this kind of idea of you code a little and then you test a little. So we have features like Test Explorer that encourage developers to kind of do that and make them productive while they're doing it. So having this kind of single test environment is something that we're spending a lot of effort on. This is something that in DevDiv, a lot of teams still have different dev environments and test environments. And so we're making a lot of investment now to try to get single environments and say tests run everywhere. So the same set of tests can run on the dev desktop, and they can run on the tester's machine. And of course, for that, you also need great kind of dev test environments, and the idea of being able to kind of provision lab environments where you can run tests. And we're doing a lot in our products. If you saw some of the launch, we've done a lot with Azure to enable kind of dev test on the cloud with Azure, and we'll be doing more in that area. So with devs doing more of the testing of the code, we focus testers on thinking about the product more end-to-end. So they spend more time doing things like exploratory testing or running kind of system level or integration level tests. And we've done a lot of work in the product to enable some of these things, and we ourselves are starting to use some of these tools to do our end-to-end testing. So having this quality also then means you want to track that as part of the feature team. You can track that kind of afterwards. And we use a bunch of different metrics. You saw some of them earlier to kind of track bugs. But we've kind of enabled a lot of that into our TFS experience as well. And then finally, this idea of kind of working to kind of improve the code in development, we really kind of focus a lot on kind of making developers, the everyday developer, very productive. Right? So if they're spending lots of time handing back and forth things to other developers or to testers, they're not going to be efficient and productive, kind of fixing all those bugs and kind of having high quality code. And so we're actually spending a lot of time in our engineering systems looking at metrics like how long does it take from when a developer writes a piece of code until it's actually in a production zone. Right? And that, if you think about it, there's all sorts of things that happen. Build, validation. So we're spending a lot of time making those things faster. And many of those things, because our own system runs on TFS, those improvements are showing up in TFS. So like faster builds will show up in TFS and things like that. One of the things that we've done, some of you probably, how many of you have seen CodeLens? Probably not. So one of the things that we've done in Visual Studio 2013, we have this new feature called CodeLens. And what it does is, it lets you, as you're writing code as a developer, actually see lots of contextual information. So you can see from this one function, if there's two references to this function, you can see who's actually checked in changes to that function, right? And what those check-ins were. You can view diffs right from there. You can see how many tests, it doesn't show it here, but how many tests, unit tests are marked against this function, how many are passing, how many failed. And then you can start to collaborate with people who are working on that capability right there. And so these kinds of features we think are super important to make developers very productive in that kind of day-to-day development. Because it's not just them writing a bunch of code and checking it in, but it's also making sure that they're testing the code, they're looking at the history of the code, and kind of writing higher quality code from day one. I mentioned making fundamentals a feature. We actually had a big problem in Visual Studio 2010. Our product started getting so big, we ran out of virtual address space for running in a VM. And we ended up, it was one of the problems that we had in our performance overall, but we ended up doing a major push to improve the performance before shipping. And so after that, we decided make things like performance a feature. So at the same time that we plan product features, we plan performance goals, and we track them just like features. And so we've done a lot in our engineering tools to kind of enable us to kind of invest in things like performance and reliability the same way that we build new features. And you can see some of those things. We've actually released a whole bunch of kind of whole app performance tools. And then of course the other one that shows up in the cloud side is our load testing tools, which are both in the on-premise product as well as in the cloud. load testing and performance kind of tools are really nice in this world because they give you a whole app view of the product, right? Not just one feature team, but when you're writing features, you can see, did your feature regress any of the performance or reliability of the whole application? And by running these tests, you can kind of find that quickly. So we have regressions, we call them regression prevention systems. So things that when you come up with a new feature, just like you're running unit tests, you can actually submit to run a bunch of performance tests. And if any of them regress, your checking will be rejected. And then you have to go fix the performance issue before you check it.
他刚刚提到这些测试的工具，那因为是他们测试并自己用，我们慢慢的就把它 implement 在我们自己的产品 Visual Studio 上面。那这些可能待会我们另外一个同事在应该是4点半之后，他会直接 demo 给我们看。哦，对。Okay, well, I just say that another colleague he might demo
Oh, great.
scenario. Yeah, probably later for you.
Okay. So shipping early and often. So when you're trying to ship on a one-year schedule, you don't get to have betas, right? You don't get to have long RCs, long betas. And so how do you get the right feedback to get the right product? How do you stabilize? So for us, what's very important in this world is how often do we ship? And we think of shipping not just to customers, but to ourselves. So we dog food all of our products. We use our products as we build them. So we have a TFS server, we call it Pioneer. It's about half of our division is on Pioneer. And every sprint, we actually update Pioneer with the latest bits. And so the team is actually using the product as they're working. Every sprint, we also have a full dog food build of Visual Studio that anyone inside Microsoft can use. And we try to have the division use. And we're trying to actually make that even more frequent. All our updates have, every 3 weeks, they have a CTP that we make publicly available so people can try out the products. And so, a key thing, I think, in shipping more often, if you're shipping your product more often, is you have to also ship before you ship the product, you have to make your previews and things like that available very often, so that you can get that early feedback.
How do you do the uploading? Work with IT or?
So we, Visual Studio uses, we ourselves use Visual Studio to build Visual Studio or to test Visual Studio. So that's a benefit that we have. There are other product teams at Microsoft. So for example, Office has a dog fooding where everyone in Microsoft gets the current version of Office that's being developed. You can get Office dog food, right, and you can use the product. For Visual Studio, we inside the division use it, but then also all our partner teams use it. So for example, for Visual Studio 2012 and 2013, all the teams that were building apps for Windows 8 and Windows 8.1, they were using the latest version of the product. And we actually, internally, we have a tool, and we're actually working on making the tool better. It's a thing that basically you plug in, it changes the boot sector on your machine, and then you basically turn it on and you install the latest version of Windows and the latest version of Visual Studio in about 20 minutes. And then you are ready to go. Right? And so, we are trying to do, anything we can to try to get more usage of our product and use that to get us more quality feedback. And we think that that's very important in shipping faster.
So is there any contingency plan in case any critical issue happens?
Yeah, so this is an interesting challenge. If you're going to do dog food, you also can't give bad products. Dog food builds have to have their own level of quality, right? So they have to have their own exit criteria. We do allow people to roll back, but even then, if you publish poor quality dog food builds, then people will not dog food your product. And so driving quality upstream that I was describing, that's very important to have a good dog food program. So all of these things have to go together.
So when we usually do the dog fooding,
Yeah.
yeah.
We are trying to do dog fooding from, basically have a continuous dog fooding go. So Pioneer updates every sprint, right? So that it's not, it doesn't pause. Now sometimes it's not going to get new features. So one of the things that we do as part of getting code into dog food builds more often, and this is also true of production sites, is we have this concept called feature flags. So feature flags, if you're working on something and you're not quite finished, right, and you don't think it's ready to, you can turn it off with a feature flag, right? This is also how we can put features into the service and have them turned off in the on-premise version, right? Or deploy features and have them turned off until we're ready to actually make them available, right? So we use things like feature flags to be able to control the flow of new features to our customers. So some of the things in our product that we've done, I think enabling continuous deployment from Azure from TFS to Azure. We now kind of enable you to have basically marked builds that automatically get deployed into a test environment in Azure, so that you can very easily kind of create real deployments of any build. And then we recently acquired a technology called in-release that's now available as part of Visual Studio that basically enables release management. So you can basically create release definitions of different kinds of releases of your product and make them use that to kind of manage deployments of your product to customers.
We will also demo this after this session. Yeah, release management.
I think the cloud has really changed this model, right? We are struggling to figure out how to get our box product to be used, and we're having to build these kinds of things to get people to adopt. On the cloud, you just update the cloud environment. Right? As a good example, at Microsoft, when you go to Bing inside Microsoft, you automatically get the Bing internal preview version. Right? So everyone inside Microsoft uses the Bing beta, and that requires no work for us. And it's just in the service world, getting people to use your things is easy. I mentioned living the life cycle culture. This is something that I think doing VS Online, we've really learned a lot about how to kind of think about the state of the product in production. Right? And now we're trying to actually bring a lot of that learning back even to our box product. And we're doing this kind of instrumentation and more analysis even in our shipping product. We have a dashboard like this. This actually comes from our App Insights product, but we have a dashboard just like this for Visual Studio Online. And every morning the developer, the Visual Studio Online dev team gets up and they look at that. Right? And one of the things you want to do is you want to detect issues before customers see them. And so it's very important to have all of the kind of telemetry that you need to understand how the product's working. And then when you find issues, you want to actually turn those over to dev teams. So you were mentioning dev and ops, right? We have product features that allow ops to generate basically issues for the dev team that show up in TFS. And then all of the kind of context for that issue kind of comes with the bug. And then you can kind of open that up. You can go look at what's actually happening in the product to go and try and find issues. And then you can open that into Visual Studio. This is very hard to see, but all of the kind of app insights, the traces, the IntelliTrace data can come into Visual Studio, so you can basically go find the code that's causing the issue. Right? So the idea of going all the way from a high-level view of the product down to the line of code you're doing is something that's very important in this kind of life cycle world, right? Because that's what you need developers to have to be able to really respond to issues. And then lastly, I mentioned being usage and data driven. This is something that we actually were not very good at for a long time. We had some telemetry, instrumentation in our product, but every time you ask, the product team a question like, how many people use that feature? Nobody would have the answer, right? They would go, okay, we have to go figure out what to put in to go learn that. So we've changed the culture to the team. Every team now, when they build a feature, as part of the design, they have to think about what data they want to collect to make that feature better. We call them learning goals. They have to think about what instrumentation they want to put in, what questions they want to answer. And we make them design that. And one of the things that we have to do then is test that to make sure that is actually working, right? A lot of times the data that we get is not good data. And so as part of testing, you test not only features, but make sure that telemetry is the telemetry you're getting is actually good. And this is something that is true not just for the shipped product, but it's from kind of early on in the project. So when we do our dog fooding, we actually encourage lightweight feedback. We have a feature in Visual Studio called Send a Smile that allows anyone to click a button, type in some text, and send it. And they can send a smile or a frown. We actually have a bunch of analytics tools that take all that data. We do text search over it to find trends and things like that. But it's a great way of people giving us feedback without having to do a lot of work. So we've actually got features in the product that allow you to do a release, request feedback from stakeholders, and they can actually run through the project and easily give us feedback on, give the team feedback on the feature. And that feedback then shows up directly inside TFS. And then from a product perspective, a lot of the kind of things that we're learning and understanding user behavior and things like that in the product, you'll start to see some of those things in the Visual Studio App Insight product that we announced at our launch. And you'll see in their product, there are actually lots of features that allow you to kind of understand what users are actually doing and look at how the system is behaving. So if the system crashed, right, like if you were seeing an issue in the product, what were users doing to cause that, right? Or what are users spending more time doing that you want to make faster or improve? Those are all things that we're trying to kind of build into App Insight to give people a better understanding of how their service or their product is being used. All right, so that was kind of hopefully a quick view of what we've kind of learned and some of the things that we're still continuing to learn. I would say we're very much in the early days of understanding how to do this kind of continuous delivery. I think as an industry, but also from a Microsoft perspective. Even just this releasing Visual Studio Online this last month, I think was a great experience for us, kind of understanding how to ship services. And the nice thing is, as we learn these things, we're kind of continuing to kind of build and try new things ourselves, and then make those available as product features to help with all developers kind of ship software in this kind of continuous services model. So, overall, I think the view, we're just one organization. We share a lot of similarities with many of you in terms of teams, but every team is different. And so part of our philosophy is, all of our ALM capabilities, a lot of these things you saw here, we don't recommend you do all of them exactly in one way, right? Just like we have. You want to take the things that you take the capabilities and decide which ones to adapt. So many of these things that I talked about, they don't require you to go use all Agile or all services development or anything like that. You can pick up individual features and individual capabilities. You can do Agile project management or better customer feedback or more driving quality upstream. And you can use some of our capabilities to do that. through TFS. And then, in addition to the on-premise product, we obviously now also have Visual Studio Online. And the nice thing is that also then allows you to take many of these capabilities and extend them across your core functionality. You might already have TFS on-premise today, you might have something else. You can start to add some of these more kind of agile capabilities using features from Visual Studio Online. If you've got kind of a diverse organization, you can use Visual Studio Online to connect them to your product team for doing things like project management. If you're doing cross-platform development, both online and on-premise, we have a bunch of capabilities that allow different teams doing software on all sorts of platforms, not just Microsoft platforms, but whether it be Java or Android or iOS, to be able to work together with Visual Studio Online. Having this idea of software as a service, if you have a small team that's kind of building something, you don't need to have them focus on spending time setting up servers and things like that. They can just kind of go use online to get started. And then finally, with the capabilities that we're doing in things like App Insights, it allows you to take any existing app and learn more about it by connecting App Insights to it. So that's kind of a high-level view of some of these capabilities I talked about today, how we're making them available in a more kind of lightweight way through Visual Studio. All right, with that, that concludes my session today. Hope it was informative. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to